Just like what we discussed yesterday, the US is really eager to end the conflict with Iran. The reason is that Donald Trump desperately wants oil prices to go down so that the Fed can cut interest rates. And right after saying that yesterday, today, Trump has already threatened to fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. The only reason is that Powell refuses to lower interest rates as Trump wants. This has made Trump feel extremely powerless, because if the Fed doesn't cut rates, the U.S. economy won't grow, people won't have jobs, and in the upcoming midterm elections, what achievements can Trump present to Congress? That's why Trump wants to remove Powell as quickly as possible so that a new person can take over. This is also what makes many people fascinated with U.S. politics. It's so complicated and ironic. Trump himself was the one who nominated Jerome Powell as Fed chair. And Powell is so capable that he served under 2 consecutive presidents, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But now, in Trump's eyes, Powell is no different from an enemy. In May, Powell's term as Fed chair will end, and he will return to being one of the 7 members of the Fed's Board of Governors, whose job is basically to vote on whether to raise or lower interest rates. But Trump doesn't even want that. He wants Powell completely out, no involvement with the Fed at all. This shows how quickly U.S. politicians can turn on each other. One day, you promote someone. The next day, if they go against you, you try to remove them entirely, even investigate them criminally, to send them to prison. Even though that person was once praised highly by you in the media. This shows that the U.S. system operates primarily on performance, not personal relationships. On one hand, it may seem harsh and lacking humanity. People who once supported each other can later destroy each other like enemies. But on the other hand, this is exactly why major global corporations want to invest in the U.S., because everything is transparent. Conflicts are out in the open, not hidden. More importantly, this highlights the independence of the Fed. The U.S. president cannot interfere with its monetary policy. The Fed has only 2 main responsibilities: controlling inflation and maintaining employment. It doesn't care about wars or political conflicts, whether the president is fighting trade wars with China, Russia, or anyone else. That's not the Fed's concern. Because of this independence, countries trust the U.S. dollar and want to hold it as reserves. They know the dollar is not controlled by any individual's emotions, even Donald Trump. No matter what Trump wants, he cannot control Fed interest rates. The dollar is managed by some of the most experienced and rational minds in the world. That's why there's no fear of arbitrary rate cuts that would hurt those holding dollars. Because of the Fed's influence, whenever it raises or lowers interest rates, global financial markets react strongly. If the Fed cuts rates, other countries often have to follow to stabilize exchange rates. No one forces them, but the pressure is huge. Very few countries can go against the trend. If the Fed raises rates, countries like Vietnam almost certainly have to raise rates too. That's because big investors will pull capital back to the U.S. to deposit in banks or buy U.S. bonds. This creates a shortage of dollars and excess local currency, leading to inflation if not controlled. To stabilize exchange rates, countries either raise interest rates or use their dollar reserves to compensate. On the other hand, if the Fed cuts rates, returns in the U.S. drop, and investors start pouring money into other countries like Vietnam. They convert dollars into local currency, increasing demand for it. Then, local banks may lower rates to support liquidity. When foreign capital flows in, economies can benefit greatly. Of course, this doesn't happen perfectly in sync everywhere, but that's the general principle. That's why every Fed decision shakes the entire world. And this is also why many investors hope the US-Iran conflict ends soon, so the US can cut rates and the global economy can recover. Because if the US keeps rates high, other countries will be forced to follow. And when interest rates rise, businesses, especially real estate, suffer badly. If real estate collapses, it drags down dozens of related industries: steel, cement, construction materials, appliances, even secondary sectors. So, emotionally, some people might want Iran to hit back hard at the US. But, looking at the bigger picture, if the US loses and oil prices skyrocket, forcing the Fed to raise rates further, then everyone suffers. Businesses are already struggling with just slight rate increases. If trade slows down, especially for perishable exports like fruits and seafood, even short delays can cause losses. Without cash flow, companies can't repay loans, and bankruptcy becomes inevitable. In good times, refinancing debt is easy. But in difficult times, credit tightens, and borrowing becomes extremely hard. Some businesses may resort to high-interest informal loans, but those rates are brutal, around 0.5% per day. For example, borrowing 20 billion VND for just 1 week could cost 700 million VND in interest. That's unsustainable. No business can survive like that. And when a company collapses, it doesn't just affect the owner. It impacts thousands of workers and many partners. Eventually, everyone's income is affected. That's why people are hoping the US-Iran conflict ends soon, interest rates drop, and trade stabilizes. Because if the US tightens spending and consumers stop buying imports, countries like Vietnam, which rely heavily on exports, will be hit hard. At that point, everything could fall apart.